Okay. You have absolutely no recollection one way or the other?
Honestly, it didn't matter to me which trip was first.
I understand. Be that as it may, do you concede that your testimony here today as to the order of the sequence of the trips is different than your testimony was back at Hemi Newman's trial?
Yes.
Now, raises an interesting situation.
Is that a question, sir?
I'm going to ask you a question, sir.
You may.
Okay. The Greenville trip, you testified, was when Hemi Newman told you that the woman gave in, right?
Correct.
The London trip was the trip when the woman didn't give in, but quote-unquote finished herself off in the bathroom.
Correct.
Is it your recollection that Hemi Newman told you that on a trip in August, the woman gave in, which to you meant had intercourse, right?
Yes.
And then when they went to London, having already given in, the woman did not engage in intercourse, but nonetheless simply petted and then finished herself off.
Yes.
That's your testimony then?
Yes.
And that's what Hemi Newman told you, correct?
Yes.
Now, you talked to Rosenthal and Potter on that day in March. Did you tell them anything at all about this incident in London where Hemi Newman told you that this woman went into the bathroom and finished herself off?
I don't recall.
Have you had a chance to review that particular interview?
No, sir.
Do you remember how long that interview took?
I don't recall.
Would it have been somewhere in the neighborhood of about 37 minutes?
Okay.
Okay. Does that, I mean, I'm not telling you what the answer is, ma'am. Does that sound about right?
About right, yeah.
Okay. Do you have any recollection of ever, during the course of that first interview back in March of 2011, with two investigators from the DA's office, ever bringing up the subject of any sexual contact in London?
I do not remember. I do not remember.
That was a reasonably easy thing to recall, would it not be?
Yes.
That's not a typical discussion that one engages with on a regular basis about. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Especially when the person who is having that conversation with you is a member of another sex and is not your husband.
Correct.
Would it be fair to say that you have never had such a conversation with any male about that subject before? About someone finishing themselves off?
Correct.
Okay. But so it would be something that would stick out in your mind, fair enough?
Yes.
Okay. And again, you have absolutely no idea whether or not in the conversation you had in March of 2011, you brought that up.
I may have.
And you may not have, do you know?
I may not have. I probably did, but I do not remember.
Okay. And they were not rushing you during the course of this interview by any means, were they?
No.
They gave you ample opportunity to say whatever you had to say, correct?
Yes.
Now, did Hemi Newman ever tell you anything about a trip to, he told you about one trip to Greenville, right?
Yes.
And did he tell you at any time about a second trip to Greenville?
I don't recall.
You still had contact with him in October of 2010, correct?
Correct.
And you still had contact with him in November of 2010, correct?
Correct.
But you only recall the subject of one Greenville trip coming up when Hemi Newman was relating information to you. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did Hemi Newman ever tell you about any trip he took to Melbourne, Florida?
Yes.
When did he do that?
December of 2010, he and his girls were going to see his father, and his stepmother had just passed away.
And that was, did they live in Melbourne, Florida, do you know?
I don't know if it was Melbourne, but I know it was Florida.
Okay, let me refocus the question. Did Hemi Newman ever tell you that he had taken a trip with Andrea to Melbourne, Florida?
No.
Did Hemi Newman ever tell you that he had taken a trip to Norfolk, Virginia with Andrea?
No.
Did Hemi Newman ever tell you that he had taken a trip to Minden, Nevada with Andrea?
No.
Did Hemi Newman ever tell you about an incident outside of Lake Tahoe where he would have read a love poem to Andrea?
No,
Did Hemi Newman ever tell you about a trip he took to Longmont, Colorado?
no,
Did Hemi Newman ever tell you about spending the night in a hotel room with Andrea in Longmont, Colorado?
no,
Did the subject of Colorado, as best you can recall, ever come up?
no.
Now, the description of the trip to Greenville, if I understand correctly, based on what Mr. Newman said, was he and Andrea had gone to, is it a park or some such thing? Sit near a lake or something like that? It refreshed my memory.
Yes, sir.
Tell me what he said.
I believe he said they were sitting on a park bench overlooking the lake having a drink.
Okay, and then they went and had a nice dinner, right?
Correct?
And then somewhere along the line, he calls you, right?
Correct.
Does he call in the midst of all this?
No, they had just finished dinner, and I believe he said she had just gone back up to the room. He was getting ready to go back up.
So he is, you don't know, is he in his room? Is he in the lobby, or do you have a clue?
I'm not there, I don't know.
Okay, in fact, you don't know any of this by your own personal knowledge, right?
Only from what Hemi told me.
Hemi said, yeah. Everything you are testifying to is what Hemi has told you, right?
Correct.
Okay, you're not in a position to vouch for its credibility or reliability, are you?
No,
Okay. Do you know the woman who sits here today, Andrea Sneiderman?
no,
Okay. Have you seen her before?
sure, yes,
But had you seen her prior to the death of her husband back on November the 18th of 2010?
no,
Have you ever had a substantive conversation with Andrea Sneiderman?
no,
Have you ever had any conversation with Andrea Sneiderman?
no.
So if I'm understanding correctly, and what time of day is it that this phone call is received?
From Greenville
Yeah,
in the evening,
could you be a little more specific?
9.
And if you can't, that's fine.
like 9:30.
Okay. So they sit by the lake or the park, they have dinner, they're getting ready to go upstairs, and he calls you and says, "What do I do?"
Yes,
Now again, he's well into his 40s at this point, right?
yes,
He's been married and has 3 kids, right?
yes,
And I'm presuming you tell him, go to your room and leave the poor girl alone, right?
correct,
Because he has repeatedly told you, has he not, during the course of his conversations with you, that Andrea has adamantly told him, I'm not leaving my husband, I'm not leaving my kids, correct?
correct.
How many times is it that Hemi Newman told you that Andrea had told him that?
Quite a few.
Can you quantify, as best you can, quite a few?
6 or 7?
Okay. Was it a recurring thing?
Yes, and at one point he told me that she was not going to ever leave Rusty or get divorced. She was raised by her parents not to believe in divorce.
So she wasn't leaving her husband and she wasn't leaving her kids, right?
Correct.
And this is, leaving aside whatever advice you gave to Mr. Newman, this is what he's telling you this woman is allegedly supposed to have said, right?
Yes.
When is the last time you remember him telling you that Andrea simply wasn't going to leave her husband and wasn't going to leave her kids?
I don't recall.
Okay. Would it have been in November of 2010?
I don't recall.
Would it have been in October?
October, more likely.
Okay. How much contact did you actually have with Hemi Newman in November of 2010?
Not a lot.
When you say not a lot, can you help us out here?
Probably 4 or 5 times, maybe 3 or 4 times.
And those would not have been in person, those simply would have been over the phone, right?
Correct.
Now, somewhere along the line, you got introduced to Rusty, right?
Via email and phone,
You
correct.
never actually met him in person, right?
No, we were supposed to meet in December for lunch.
Okay, but you had not done so, right?
No, sir.
Obviously, and Rusty was dead by December. How is it that you got hooked up or connected to Rusty?
Hemi had told me when he was passed up with the promotion at GE that he was looking for outside positions and that Rusty was looking for a business to purchase and that he was going to bring Hemi on to be the CFO. And I was putting Rusty in touch with my ex-husband, who is an attorney and has a business attorney, and has a lot of clients who have businesses for sale. So trying to make that commission, trying to put two and two together.
No problem with that, ma'am. So Hemi Newman told you that he was contemplating leaving GE, correct?
Yes.
When is it that he told you that he was contemplating leaving GE?
I don't recall.
Do you recall how many times he would have told you that?
Once or twice.
Okay. To your understanding, he was working at GE at the time, correct?
Yes, sir.
The woman of whom he was fond was also working at GE, correct?
Yes.
They were going on GE business trips together, correct?
Yes.
But what you are telling us is that Hemi Newman was thinking about leaving his job where the other woman worked. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, you talked to Rusty on the phone and I guess communicated with him electronically, right?
Yes.
Again, you don't know when that was, I guess, do you?
I don't recall.
Fair enough. At some point, did you know Rusty's last name?
At some point, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And at some point, did you find out Andrea's last name?
Yes.
Do you know when that was?
I do not recall.
Okay. Was it before Rusty's murder?
Whoa, yes.
Okay. So at some point, you knew that Hemi Newman was infatuated with Andrea Sneiderman, correct?
Yes.
You knew that Andrea Sneiderman was married to Rusty Sneiderman, correct?
Yes.
And you were in contact with Rusty Sneiderman in regard to a possible business deal, correct?
Correct.
And again, not wanting to beat a dead horse, you had no communication or no contact with Mrs. Sneiderman, did you?
Correct.
Now, November the 18th, do you remember that day?
I do.
You had had surgery 2 days earlier, correct?
Correct.
And as such were partially laid up, I guess, right?
Yes, sir, pretty much.
Something with your ankle.
My foot.
Foot, okay. And otherwise, you probably would have been at the office.
Definitely.
And your office is in very close proximity to Dunwoody Pro, correct?
Our office, it's in the back, right behind it.
Okay. Can you estimate in terms of yards how far one is from the other?
From the back of our building to Dunwoody Prep, maybe 200 yards?
You were not, however, there that morning when the shooting occurred, correct?
Correct.
At some point, you were home on the 18th, right?
Yes.
Did you hear the news about a shooting in Dunwoody?
Yes.
Did you find out at some point during the course of the day on the 18th that the person shot had been Rusty Sneiderman?
Yes.
Did you immediately go, wait a second, that's the guy I've been communicating with over the phone and electronically?
Yes.
And did you think, that's the guy who's married to Andrea Sneiderman?
Yes.
And did you think, that's the guy who Hemi Newman is infatuated with?
Yes.
When did you go with that information to the police?
When did I didn't?
Okay. And the reason you didn't is because you could not possibly begin to imagine that Hemi Newman could possibly have committed such a crime, could you?
No.
You had talked to Hemi Newman many, many times during the months of August, maybe July, September, October, November of 2010, correct?
Yes.
You knew he had a thing for Andrea Sneiderman, correct?
Yes.
But there was nothing about his personality that led you to conclude that he could have committed such a crime, was there?
No.
Now, did you talk to Hemi on the 18th?
I did.
And who called whom, if you recall?
I called him.
Okay. And what do you recall that conversation, ma'am?
That I told him it was too close to home.
Okay. And when you said too close to home, both physically and by virtue of the fact that you knew these folks, right?
Yes, sir.
What was his response?
Crazy, I know.
Okay. Did he seem upset?
He was upset for Andrea, yes.
Okay. Did he say anything about whether he was going to go to Rusty's funeral?
I don't know if he said it on that day, but yes, I was aware he was going to Rusty's funeral.
And did he go and sit Shiva at the Sneiderman household?
Yes.
Now, for the benefit of those of us who are not Jewish, could you briefly explain sitting Shiva, what exactly that entails and means?
Shiva, you sit Shiva after a death of someone, and that's how you mourn them for an extended period of time, 5 to 7 days as usual.
Now, you would not have gone and sat Shiva at the house, would you?
No, sir.
You didn't really know these folks.
Correct.
I mean, you didn't know Andrea, you didn't really know Rusty, right?
Correct.
Okay. But Hemi did, apparently, right?
Correct.
And sometime after that, you and he got into a phone conversation about the subject of who on earth would have done this, right?
Correct.
Did Hemi offer any theories as to who might have done this?
Yes.
Tell us about those.
He said that Rusty had a individual come from California who was going to do voiceovers, like famous people voiceovers for recordings, and that the deal had gone sour, and that person had gone back to California, and that person had stayed with Rusty and Andrea at their home, and he said that it could have been that person who was angry about the falling out of the deal.
So Hemi Newman is speculating that some poor guy in California might have been the actual killer, correct?
I'm going to object at this juncture as to the relevance of this, as to who Hemi thought did what.
Your Honor, I think
Response?
it goes directly to the credibility and reliability of Hemi Newman. The jury, if they're going to accept the testimony of Ms. White, is going to have to believe that Hemi Newman is a credible individual. I expect the evidence is going to show that Hemi Newman is the killer. If he is accusing someone else, I think that has a significant effect on his credibility, and it's a relevant issue for this jury.
Response?
Your Honor, I agree his credibility is something that's fair game. However, the questions that were asked and the answers that were given were in relation to an affair. As counsel has enlightened all of us on several occasions, his client's not charged with murder. She's charged with lying about having a romantic relationship, and that's what the evidence was tendered for.
All right, I'm going to sustain the objection. Let's move on.
Okay, Your Honor, may I?
Exceptions noted.
Well, I need to make a further objection for the record, and I need to put something else on the record as well. I might do so right now.
Oh, sure you can. Ladies and gentlemen, where's my deputy? You let the jury step out. Just step out into the jury room. Madam Witness, you can step outside for a minute. Come on. Where's my deputy? If you could just step into the jury. It'll be a brief break. Go ahead and refresh yourself at this point in time. And it'll be the normal brief period, so move aggressively. Ms. White, you can come on down and step outside for a minute, please.